Israel could be with idolatry, and next week just how bad Israel could be. And next week there's a civil war actually to talk about a little bit, and so we'll talk about that. But tonight we're going to be talking a lot about idolatry. We're going to be talking a lot about idolatry. Tonight is a great lesson about that terrible subject. We are in Judges chapter 17, so I'd like to start off, just kind of remember, well, I like maps, you know that, and kind of place we're going to be talking about a couple of different places tonight. We'll be talking about Dan. Last week we talked about Samson. Samson was our well-known judge from Dan, and we're going to be talking about Dan and Ephraim and this region right here quite a bit, and how some of the things that are going to happen, we're going to be talking about this area here. These last few chapters contain the same phrase over and over again, and it's this phrase right here. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. What is that statement saying? What is it declaring?
Didn't have any law.
There's no law, and kind of interesting that it describes it that way, Teresa. Chaos, yeah, like that anarchy, chaos. Great.
People are doing what they want to do, not what God wants.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because the suggestion is, although, later on when Israel gets a king, they don't really go about it in a way that pleases God. But what it's suggesting is that without somebody who was a king to kind of rein them in, the people were kind of out of control. And these next few chapters are going to be a lot of out of control moments that perhaps the writer here, and I've said before, some people think this might be Samuel, who himself is one of the judges, but he's the judge that brings in King Saul and then King David. But the point he might be describing here is just how problematic they have been without kings and the problems that they have caused. So this is kind of an interesting statement. And like I said, it's mentioned quite a bit here in these last couple of chapters. It just describes the idea that without this authority in place, the people are going to behave badly. So let's start reading here in chapter 17. By the way, time period wise, this takes us back not after Samson, but all the way back to the beginning. This is probably just a few years after the Israelites have conquered the land, or even potentially are still in the process of conquering the land. At one point, we're going to read a little bit about how the Danites are going to getting into their area and trying to take their land and get control of it. So this is very early on. So we've stepped back in time several hundred years. And now we're talking about a time period, as I said, right after the conquest, maybe even before any judges have come along. Can I get somebody to read verses 1 through 6? Well, Isaac needs you.
Now there was a man of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Micah. He said to his mother, "The 1,100 pieces of silver which were taken from you, about which were uttered a curse in my hearing, behold, the silver is with me, I took it." And his mother said, "Blessed be my son by the Lord." He then returned the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother, and his mother said, "I wholly dedicate the silver from my hand to the Lord for my son to make a graven image and a molten image. Now therefore I will return them to you." So when he returned the silver to his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave them to the silversmith, who made them into a graven image and a molten image, and they were in the house of Micah. And the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and household idols, and consecrated one of his sons, that he might become his priest. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes.
It's kind of a confusing story to start us off with, about this guy, Micah, and what he does. Launches off with the story saying there was some money taken from an Israelite woman. Who took the money? Her son did. Yeah, what a rascal right away. And he says, "Well, I heard the curse that you made whenever you did it." So he's bringing back that money. She's really pleased about it, and she does what with that silver? Yeah. And she says, "I've dedicated it to," verse 3, it says, "dedicated it to the Lord." I wrote the name Jehovah, God's name. Why did I write that? What did I misread something? Or why did I write that, Daria?
When it's in all caps, it's meant to represent.
That's right. So in your Bibles, it's just a little tidbit to remind you. Whenever you see the word Lord in all capital letters, the translators are telling you it's actually the word Jehovah, the name Jehovah, but they're following an old tradition. I'm not in love with the tradition. I kind of wish we could see the word just to know that that's what we're talking about. But as she's saying, I've dedicated this to Jehovah. And well, you think, well, that sounds nice. That sounds really great. I've dedicated it to Jehovah, and here's what I want you to do. And what do they want him to do? Oh, my goodness. Does she not read Exodus? How that goes, and she decides they take it and they make an idol. Not clear to me sometimes if a carved image and a molded image are two different images, or if they're just describing one image and work two different ways. So I just kind of put, is it one or two? Either one could be the case, but she makes an image of Jehovah. Now, what did that image look like? It doesn't matter. But to be honest, we're going to come along a little later. Earlier, what was the last time we made an image of Jehovah? A cow. We're going to come back a little later on as we talk about the things in this chapter, and we're going to suggest that it's going to be a cow again. That's kind of strange. But one of the things we always said that's interesting about the golden calf with Exodus is that the Egyptians worshipped cows, something they called the Apis bulls, that they had these sacred cows, that cows were a marker of deity. So it seems like maybe this is something they drug out of Egypt and they kept carrying with them, that whenever they made an image of Jehovah, it was going to be a bull or something like that. So very interesting. That's a good chance that's what we're talking about here. But he doesn't just stop there. What else does he do? Yeah, he makes an ephod, which was the priestly garment. Then he makes a bunch of little what? I say little, it doesn't say little. But he makes household gods, which, you know, I've seen archaeologists pull them up, and they're just little tiny things that you just put in little places all over your house, you know, just these little idols of things you put around. And then what does he do? What's his last act?
Makes one of his sons a priest.
And then he makes his son a priest. Now, we're reading this, we're scratching our heads saying, what's going on? Why is nobody stopping this? And then we get that little tidbit in verse 6. No king. Nobody's going to put a stop to this. Nobody's interested in trying to get this guy to quit doing the things that he's doing. He's just going to do what's right in his own eyes. Now, I find this little story fascinating, which is fascinating for a lot of reasons. Number one, it's just how easy it was for them to find this as a good idea. Number two, how well this translates to some of the problems in religion today. That lots of people today that make things what they think God is like. Wendy was talking today with some of our neighbors, and she was kind of telling me, she says, you know, they each talk about God, and well, that's great. But she says, but they just talk about God the way they want God to be, you know. And that's kind of what idolatry is. Idolatry is a lot of aspects that I want to come back if we have the time at the end there. First question was kind of an interesting story about the background of this silver. Why do you think it's there? Why do you think we're being told about the whole story of the silver before the idol even gets made? What do you think it's trying to get us to see, Wendy?
Well, does it have anything to do with the silver paid to Samson? It was the same amount.
Oh, Wendy, I never noticed that. Well, you stumped the chump. I congratulate you. No, I never noticed that. I didn't know. Like I said, this is supposed to be hundreds of years before Samson. But that is very fascinating that it is the same amount. I didn't put that together till just now. You look very content. You should. Yeah, it's well done. Well done.
It's almost dirty money.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was thinking about. Yeah.
So the character of Micah already is shown as, except he gave it back. It's hard.
Yeah, so I think that the money is already, we could use the term filthy lucre. You know, it's kind of an interesting term to say, ill-gotten gains. The money is already something that has a curse on it, that was stolen, you know, that's shady as it is. And so now we're saying, well, let's just turn it into something for God. And that really already kind of sets off the fact that this story is going bad from the moment it starts, that there's a problem.
I mean, if, you know, even apart from doing an idol, is she kind of doing an Ananias and Sapphira here, where she says, I wholly dedicate the silver, and then just gives 200 pieces?
And only gives some of it. Isn't that interesting? I don't know what to make of that. I don't know if that's a deception or if that's, you know, a great pharisaical, you know, I've made it Corban, but I'm only giving a portion of it. I really don't know what she's saying about that. Anybody else have a thought about that? That actually is an interesting thing that I'm not sure about. if it was a deception or not. Teresa?
I had another thought. It reminded me of when Judas took the silver and then tried to give it back.
Yeah, that was
He did give it
blood money, they said, right? They said we can't touch it because it's blood money. So it's kind of interesting, the idea that they wouldn't take something that he tried to dedicate or give back, to the Lord in that way too. So anyone else have a thought? So it's interesting about this kind of leading into this story about Micah and what he sets up. And he sets up this little shrine in his home, and he's got one of his sons consecrated as a priest, and has an ephod for him. Now, part two of the story, as we continue on here, let's let's just go ahead and read through the rest of the chapter, verses 7 through 13. Go ahead.
Now there was a young man of Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. And the man departed from the town of Bethlehem in Judah to sojourn where he could find a place. And as he journeyed, he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. And Micah said to him, "Where do you come from?" And he said to him, "I am a Levite of Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to sojourn where I may find a place." And Micah said to him, "Stay with me, and be to me a father and a priest, and I will give to you 10 pieces of silver a year, and a suit of clothes, and your living." And the Levite went in, and the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man became to him like one of his sons. And Micah ordained the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and was in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord will prosper me, because I have a Levite as priest."
So now we have a Levite come in. By the way, kind of a strange statement, because do you find it confusing? Verse 7 says there was a young man from Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, and he's a Levite. Do you find that a little confusing? That's actually not unusual the way it's described. Later on in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 1 says that Elkanah, who is Samuel's father, was from Ephraim, was an Ephraimite, but he wasn't. He was a Levite. So it's kind of interesting that it appears here and there that if you were a Levite living in whatever tribe you were living in, that you kind of were described as being a part of that tribe. So he isn't from Judah. He is a Levite. Who he is going to be kind of interesting a little later on. We'll talk about that just a little bit. But he's a Levite. He shows up, and as he comes there, as he's coming through this area, Micah says, "Hey, what's going on? What are you doing?" He says, "Well, just going on my way, looking for a place. I'm just looking for a home." He says, "Well, why don't you stay with me? And you could be my priest." What's the significance here? In fact, he says in verse 13, this is a great thing. The Lord's going to be with me now. Why is that?
Levites are who are supposed to be.
Oh. But tell me this, is every Levite a priest? No, but they're a little closer. I think it's almost kind of laughable that this guy says, his son, he did it, and his son, "Get out of here, boy. You're not a priest anymore, because now we've got a Levite." Now, a Levite isn't necessarily a priest, but that's a lot closer. That's a lot closer to it. So he brings him in. Kind of interesting what he says. He says, "Dwell with me, and you'll be like a father to me." I find that interesting. That's very unusual terminology. I don't see a lot like that. Maybe like, I think Joseph in Egypt talks about his relationship with Pharaoh like that. But he says, "You'll be like a father to me and a priest for me." And the Levite was content, and the young man became like one of his sons to him. So they have this close relationship. They're consecrated. And he says, "I know now that God's going to take care of me." So here's what's kind of interesting. I think that last statement indicates that he genuinely thinks that he's going to have God's favor. I don't think he says this with any sense of irony. The fact that he's so egregiously breaking all of God's rules that he thinks this is just fine. This is okay. This is great. Even better than it was before. And I'm very much struck by that. Anybody have any thoughts or comments you want to throw at that, Debbie?
So when I was reading through this, I was thinking, so what gave Micah the power to consecrate a priest?
Okay, what gave him the power? What do you think, Debbie?
Yeah, he gave him to him.
What'd you say?
I said himself.
He just did it himself. Yeah, so obviously he had no power, and yet he came up with some process where he could say, "Well, you're now consecrated as a priest." He did it himself. It's kind of interesting later in the New Testament. And he'll talk in the book of Hebrews about making priests, and he'll talk about the idea that you can only be a priest if you're given the oath from God, that it talks about being the high priest in particular, that only God could make that choice. And you might remember that with the Israelites, some of the others wanted to be priests of God. Korah's rebellion, or the choice of Abraham as Aaron as the high priest, and God selecting him through the rod. God made it very clear only he got to pick who that would be. Again, Micah hasn't read Exodus. Micah hasn't read a lot of these things. He hasn't read Numbers. He doesn't know somehow just how big a thing he's doing. Go ahead, Teresa.
So sincerity does not equal legitimacy.
Yeah.
And we see
Yeah.
that over and over in the New Testament, especially with Saul.
Let's play with that for a moment. Teresa says sincerity does not equal. Did you say legitimacy? No. What did you say, guys?
Legitimacy.
Yeah. The sincerity does not equal legitimacy. What else doesn't equal legitimacy in this? Well, how about sacrifice? Has this man given a lot for this new shrine? Yeah, he's put a lot of money into it. He's put a lot of effort into it. He really believes this is going to work. I would suggest to you that the last verse is telling us he really wants to get closer to God. This is being told to us, though, because it's an abomination. It's going to end badly for him. Not as badly as it could have ended, but it's going to end badly for him. But he's sincere. He's invested. He wants a relationship with God, but everything's wrong. Larry, did you have a comment?
Well, when I read this, to be my father and priest, this could be the birth of the Catholic Church.
Well, it's not unusual for priests to have been called fathers in ancient times. The Egyptians had conversations like that. When Paul, or when Jesus makes the statement about, don't call any man father, in Matthew 23, he says, one is your father. He's probably reflecting the idea that lots of religions use the idea of calling somebody a father for this special relationship. And so, like I said, it's not that unusual. I'd say probably a lot of religions do too. So it's interesting you see it here. Usually it was pagan, usually it came out of pagan. Of course, like I said, for us, that's not our experience with that terminology, but it was a very much this person becomes, your intercedent for you. So to call him like a father is a very interesting term that he uses for him there. And I did catch that idea, and it struck me as, that's interesting that he's really making a mess of these things. But one of the things he's going to do is he's going to call a priest father. Nowhere in the Old Testament, by the way, were priests called father. Again, Jesus would say, you don't call any man father, in a spiritual sense. You only have one spiritual father. So go ahead, Larry. Did I cut you off? Or you adding something else?
No, that was it.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting comment there. Great.
On the father, even the man from Dan in the next chapter told him that he could gather up the stuff, the epods, and go with them, and then that he would be their father and a priest of them.
Yeah.
So it seemed to be like a common idea, perhaps, the idea of guiding them.
Yeah.
What they didn't know.
Yeah.
And Micah, down there in the 13th verse, when he says, "Now I know that the Lord will prosper me because I have a Levite as a priest." So it seems like he's working an angle there.
Yeah.
To even become more prosperous.
Yeah. I will pause for a moment and remember that in the time of Samuel, while the ark had been stolen and then brought back and moved around, that at one point when the ark was just stored in somebody's house for 3 months, I can't remember the name, started with an A, it says his whole house prospered all the time the ark was there. It's kind of interesting. You have to wonder, is that the kind of thing you're looking for?
Yeah, but even in Gideon, he made up the F.
Yeah. The golden.
But,
Yeah.
Disgrace to him.
Yeah. I mean, and you look what happened to Gideon's family, ultimately. I can't help but to think of the fact that it's not pleasing to God. It doesn't bring prosperity. And like I said, he's lucky he doesn't lose more than what he's going to lose in the next chapter. Frankly, he's very fortunate not to lose everything. But he really thinks this is about, I'm going to do great.
It reminds me of some of the times in the New Testament where we see people who are desiring authority that God didn't give to them. I was thinking especially of like Simon the magician. especially because here Micah saying, "I'm going to be the one who ordains the priest," is almost putting himself, above the.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that. The idea of the power. In fact, one of the next question was, why would the Levite agree to this? One of the answers that I think would be obvious is that the Levite saw this as an authority that he doesn't get to have. In other words, like I said, a Levite isn't a priest, but now he gets to be a priest. That sounds interesting. So to that end, but you're saying even Micah, by having the authority to consecrate it, by he has control of the sanctuary, he has control of all these things. That is a power.
Look at the next chapter when Micah gets mad. He says, "You've taken my priests and my gods," and kind of brings it as his possessions.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, they are his, right?
I wonder too if the Levites were sort of destitute now, because looks like the priestly system had kind of fall apart.
Okay.
He was actually looking for someplace to get by.
Yeah, he does make that statement. He says, "I'm looking for a place to stay." Ryan's observation that maybe the Levitical system wasn't working right. Now, Ryan, how was the Levitical system supposed to work? What was supposed to happen? They were supposed to tithe. All Israelites supposed to give 1/10 of their things. Why does that work nicely, Ryan? Because how many tribes are there? Well, there's 13 tribes, 12 of them supporting one. If everybody gives 1/10, you should have enough plus some, So it was a good system, but truth be told, who was it that compelled the people to do it? And the answer is no one. There was no system in place that compelled them to do it. So if they didn't want to, that could be a problem. So Ryan's point is that might really leave the Levites in a difficult position. There is a comment about their worship at the end of the next chapter about the house of God still being in Shiloh at this time. That's an interesting story too that we don't have time to go to, other than the tabernacle is what they're talking about. And the tabernacle was in Shiloh, indicating they were still using it during this time period. But I think it's an interesting point, right?
I wonder too how it's amazing that how quickly at the time of Joshua wheels kind of fall off so quickly. He didn't need to appoint leaders after him.
Right. And so Ryan, do you think that's Joshua's failing, or do you think Joshua is doing what God wanted?
I don't know.
Yeah, it is interesting to say that Moses putting Joshua in charge, but Joshua doesn't put anyone in charge. He gives them that stern lecture at the end of the book of Joshua, which is super important. By the way, our next study is Joshua. I reckon, and by the way, our teachers, they're going to make the point to say that, why are we spending Joshua after Judges? That would be my fault. I'll just say that I got excited and jumped into Judges, but I want to go back to Joshua. But it is interesting that Joshua doesn't put any leadership in place, and I don't think that there was an implication that he should have. But I like your expression. You said the wheels fell off right away. These events in the next 4 chapters are within the lifetime of some of the people that were with Joshua. So this is right away that things kind of fall apart, and that's really remarkable. George?
It seems so strange that they so easily go astray from what they know is right.
Yeah.
But then you think, in Hezekiah's time, they weren't even keeping the Passover.
Right. And it says they hadn't kept the Passover for hundreds of years. Again, crazy. It's crazy how bad the Israelites were at being the people of God, how terrible they were. So, very interesting. And we'll stop there. Going back to the question we have here, what are some of the reasons? What do you think that this Levite says, yeah, that sounds like a good idea? I already threw my thought out there. Maybe it's the idea of the power. I couldn't be a priest, but now I get to be one. What do you think, Debbie?
Well, now he's taken care of too.
Yeah.
He gets a wage. He gets his, I think they call it living.
Yeah.
So room and board, basically. So
Yeah.
he doesn't have to work anymore.
Yeah. What work is he doing, right? So he's just maintaining this shrine, and he's doing well. I always liked what's stated there in verse 30 about what's going to happen with him when they set all this up, and it'll talk about, this is actually not where I want to be. I want to be at verse 20, not verse 30. So verse 20, the priest's heart was glad, that this was just something that really felt good to him. Maybe he genuinely thinks, hey, I'm a great servant of God. I would love you to dwell on the idea that maybe he genuinely thinks, I love God. I love doing this stuff for God. I was called to this role. Maybe it's his heart is all behind him in this. That's, the Bible doesn't give us his genuine motivation, but let's appreciate that it could be from genuine, sincere wanting to serve God that he's doing this terrible thing. Greg?
From that verse, that doesn't even dawn on me. Ephraim's not a part of Israel.
Say it again.
Ephraim is not a part of Israel.
It is a part of Israel. What part were you?
Well, the reason I'm wondering is because there in the 21st, he says the heart was glad because the Ephraim helped, and in 19, and the priest says, better for you to be a priest to the house of one man or to be a priest to a tribe and clan in Israel. Bigger.
Yeah, he's just saying. Yeah, so right. So so bigger, more power. So No, that's okay. It's okay. It's going to be an important question here in a moment. Now, I want to pause for a second and say there is one little interesting tidbit about this Levite that's been a huge debate for 2,000 years. I like debates that are old. I'm going to read verse 30 or verse 18 and verse 30, which it says, the children of Dan set up for themselves a carved image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of captivity of the land. So identifies this guy as named Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Manasseh. Grant, you have the ESV. Would you read the ESV version?
People of Dan set up the carved image for themselves. Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Moses.
Did you catch that? Manasseh or Moses? Now, here's what's interesting. In Hebrew, although in English we're thinking they sound different, they're actually one letter different. The N is the only thing that's different. But what's super interesting is in all of the ancient Hebrew texts, the N is stuck in kind of at a weird angle. So if it was like the word would be, and then they put it like this, they said it's that's an arrow pointing down to say, should be right there. It's a very strange thing. It's the only time in the whole Old Testament where they do this weird mark. And the rabbis in the first century said, we think it's because nobody could bear the thought that this guy is Moses' grandson. And so they stuck this subscript in. And so some translations today, like the ESV and a few others, your Bible might have it as a footnote too, make the point to say it could be because Gershom was the name of Moses' son that we're actually talking about Moses' grandson of one of the greatest men in the Old Testament. And here he is committed to idolatry like this. And so some people think that the way it's written is trying to say we just can't even bear to have the name Moses associated with this. So they added an N to kind of change that name. It wouldn't be unusual that they did something like that. They do it several times. Well, the fact that they switched the word for Lord and Jehovah kind of gives this sense of, this transmutation. So interesting point. It could have been Moses' grandson of all things. And that would be a really, really, like I said, debated for the last 2,000 years as to whether or not this is the case. It's just an interesting tidbit to think, wow, could be anybody. Let's go ahead and jump into chapter 19. Sake of time, I'll just read real quickly here. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Okay, we've established that. In those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking an inheritance for itself to dwell in. For until that day, their inheritance among the tribes of Israel had not fallen. So I told you before, this is very early on in the conquest period coming to an end, but the Danites aren't fully settled. So the children of Dan send 5 men from their territory, and they go out, and I'm just going to kind of jump through this quickly. They pass through Ephraim, and they're headed north. And when they pass through Ephraim, they stop at Micah's house, it says. In verse 3, they were at the house of Micah. They recognized the voice of the young Levi. They turned and said to him, what brought you here? Why are you here? And verse 4, he tells them the story. And they say, well, why don't you ask God if this is a good idea for us to go on this trip? And so the priest, verse 6, what do you think happened here? Verse 6, the priest says, yeah, it's good. What do you think?
Said it.
I think he just said it. I don't think he asked God. I mean, like I said, this is the point here. We're supposed to be, striking our heads saying idolatry. But he says, oh, it's going to be good. You go, the Lord's with you. So they go up all the way. I'm going to jump up here. So they're down here in Dan. They come up to Ephraim, and they go all the way up here. All the way up here. Why all the way up here? Well, everything else is kind of claimed by different tribes. And they make this move, 125 miles. They go up, and they get to the city of Laish, way at the top, Laish. And it talks about Laish of the Sidonians. They're talking about the land there. And so I'm moving quickly for the sake of time. Verse 11, they get 600 men. They move north. They get these 5 spies ready to go. And the 5 spies are getting their group together. And the 5 spies say, verse 14, there's this guy who's got a house. He's got a nice idol, an ephod. Consider what you should do. So they decided to stop at Micah's house. 600 men. Is Micah thinking, yay, I'm going to get a lot of money? Or is he in a panic? He should have been a little bit panicked. But the priest is there. The 600 armed men show up. And they went into Micah's house. And, verse 18, walked out with the idol. Took it with them. The household idols, the molded image. The priest says to them, what are you doing? They say, hey, put silence it for a moment. And this is the point that Greg was reading for us earlier. Verse 19, be quiet, put your hand over your mouth, and come with us. Be a father and priest to us. Is it better for you to be a priest to the household of one man, or that you should be a priest to a tribe and a family of Israel? And the priest says, oh, this is terrible. What's he saying? Oh, yeah. It's like being offered to be a televangelist. He is excited about this. His heart is glad, and he helps them carry the stuff out. They take everything, and they empty Micah's house. Micah's not happy about this. I'm jumping ahead here. Verse 24, Micah said to them, you have taken away my gods, which I've made, a priest. You've gone away. Now, what more do I have? How can you say to me, what ails you? And verse 25, the children of Dan, or let's say the 600 armed men, say, don't let your voice get heard among us, lest angry men fall upon you and you lose your life and the lives of your household. What did they just do? They said, don't you raise your voice with us. Children of Dan went their way. Micah saw they were too strong. He turned and went back to his house. And they took the things that belonged to him, they went to Laish, to a people quiet and secure, and they struck them with the edge of the sword and burned the city with fire. There was no deliverer because it was far from Sidon. They had no ties with anyone. And it was in the valley that belongs to Beth Rehob. So they rebuilt the city and dwelt there, and they called the name of the city Dan. On this map, it actually is renamed Dan. It's kind of an interesting thing here. Some of your maps will have the tribe of Dan, and it'll be here. And then you'll have way up at the top of Naphtali, you'll have this little enclave, so to speak, of Dan. And so it is that they've set up this place in Dan. We'll come back here in a second to verse 30. When the Danites came and they asked the priest, we'd already kind of talked about this, but what's interesting about it is the priest said, go with God, he's going to be with you. And what happened? They were successful. What do you think of that? What do you think of that, Grant?
Well, aren't they doing what they're supposed to be doing by taking their inheritance?
So there's a question as to whether or not they are, because this wasn't, their land was allotted to them by lot. And so this wasn't part of that land. So there is a real question as to, should you guys be going out and taking land that God didn't promise to give you? Although, God originally said, I'll give you the land up to the river. I see that's being a big debate today, but meaning the Euphrates River. Teresa?
By chance, sometimes predictions come true.
Right. So number one, by the way, this was a 50-50 guess. You're either going to win or you're not. And it was probably an easy thing to say, well, if they don't win, I won't have to hear back from them, So why not say they won? Number two, though, there's a second thing that the Bible says in Deuteronomy 13. God says, sometimes I'll send somebody to you who will tell you something's going to happen, and it happens. And it's actually me testing you to see whether or not you're going to be faithful. I've always been fascinated by that statement in Deuteronomy 13 that God says, I might let somebody predict the future, and it might happen. I think he just got lucky. He just made the obvious guess. I see 600 guys here. I'm not going to tell them they're not going to win. I'm going to tell them they're going to do great. And, like I said, if they win, that's great. And if they don't win, I probably won't have to deal with them again. So can men falsely but successfully predict the future? Yeah, I'd say probably easily. For all the men that have made bad prophecies, once in a while they say something that looks like it comes true.
It also says that the people they're going against are not exactly we're not a difficult people to defeat, but they were isolated.
Yeah, it does make that point that although Sidon is a pretty powerful kingdom, that they're too far away to get any help. So that's an interesting point to say. This is probably easy pickings too. Great, go.
It's interesting, in my translation, it tells the Danites that the eyes of the Lord are upon you. To me, that's kind of tongue-in-cheek, edging your bet 50-50. You can take that either way.
Oh, yeah, you could say, well, he came back defeated, and you say, well, the Lord is watching you. So yeah. It's interesting. Greg, I didn't think about that, but that's very interesting. It would be you just interpreted it wrong kind of statement there. I want to jump ahead to the end because we read up through here. We saw the Danites take the city. They take this territory, it becomes there, but something super important happens that's going to be a big thing for the Israelites. Way up in the top of Dan, here in this city of Dan, they take this idol, they take this this priest and this priesthood, and they establish a shrine that goes on for hundreds and hundreds of years. In fact, in 1 Kings chapter 12, when King Jeroboam, around 900, let's say this is around 1400, so about 500 years later, he'll institute this shrine as the official shrine of the kingdom of Israel, one of two that he'll establish. And he'll take two calves and, is it the same? Is it something new? It's probably something new, but the point was this. They establish an idolatry that becomes the thing that God will hate Israel for. Little story, huge consequences. When God is having the Assyrians come in, and boy, I tell you what, you want to read something terrible, read about when Ezekiel and some of the minor prophets are talking about the Assyrians coming in and just how vicious and horrible the Assyrians were and how they butchered the Israelites. I mean, they were vicious. There's some language in there that I gives me bad dreams, some of the descriptions of what they did to the Israelites. God will say again and again, it's because of what started he'll say Dan and Bethel, the two places that this official religion was set up. What happened here became so offensive to God that when he destroys them, he says, this is why it happened. This is why I'm doing this. This has happened. I want to talk a little bit about idolatry. I find these two chapters fascinating about the concept of idolatry. Idolatry, of course, is the idea of a worship of an idol. Sometimes we kind of get confused about idolatry because we think idolatry is like, well, if it's a Buddhist something or something like that. But most of the time, idolatry in the Bible, when it's just talked about as idolatry, is an idolatry of whom? Of God, of Jehovah God. Not an idolatry of a false god. This story is not a story of an idolatry of a false god. Jeroboam, when he institutes the official religion, isn't creating an idolatry of a false god. He's creating it as an idolatry of Jehovah. What's the second command? 10 Commandments. No graven images that represent God. Why did God say that, you think? I don't. Yeah, because it's a great point to say suddenly they think that that's me. They think that's me, number one. Number two, any graven image we have, go ahead.
God is not physical, he's
Yeah, any graven image we have makes God less instantly, to try to do it that way. Number one, people worship it. Number two, and they forget that the thing is not important. But here's what's interesting. When it comes to idols, what's fascinating about idols is we want them to be valuable. We want them to be, covered with gold and covered with something so that they have an intrinsic value to us. Idols need to be valuable, number one. So I think that that's fascinating. Number two, the idea that Micah and then later the Danites consecrate these men. And that whenever Micah sets up his sons, okay, my sons, that's okay. But when the Levite shows up, he says, wow, now I can have, I use the word accredited. What am I poking at here? What am I trying to kind of make a point about? You think here, the idea that sometimes we really crave somebody that we can say, well, that person is legitimate.
What college did you go to?
That's it. That's it. I've told you all the story in the past where many years ago I was asked to speak at a funeral of a family that did not get along. And they were from multiple different churches, and I'd been asked to speak, and I didn't want to be involved in this. But some of the family showed up to my office one day, and they were just really angry and said, well, what gives you the right to speak? And I said, well, I've just been asked. And they said, well, where were you ordained at? And I said, well, actually, I'm not ordained. They said, well, we have a cousin, and he really is ordained. He's a real preacher. Wow. I can't wait to hear him. But I remember the statement was striking to me because they were so adamant that this needed an air of legitimacy that only this consecration process could bring about. There's just something about that people like. We like it when things are given the air of being official. We like that. And it makes us feel like, the sense of power here. Jesus, when he would talk about not calling a man father, but he gave a whole bunch of things. He said just eschew titles. The idea of teacher or rabbi, not in the sense of, you couldn't be a teacher, but he says don't go around calling somebody like, the doctor so-and-so or professor. Again, that's not a good example because it's not that those things are wrong, but the idea of saying in a spiritual sense, even the apostles weren't to go around talking about this. So, one of the things that a lot of people are always kind of surprised is that in the Lord's church, in the first century and even today, what do we call each other? Brother, sister. But what do we call the people that are like in charge of the church? Brother, sister. What do you call the apostles? Brother, sister. Brother Paul, Brother Saul, receive your sight. What's interesting is Jesus would say, that, whoever follows me, my brothers or sisters, that there was an absence of this elevation, but there's something that people crave in having that. The desire for a greater audience. The fact that this Levite then, what does it say about the Levite? How was he to Micah? Like a father, and he says he was like a son too. And yet, the moment these guys say, hey, we got a better deal for you, Jonathan, the Levite, is the one carrying the idols out. This guy, man, I love Micah. He's the best. Hey, you want to go with us? Yeah, let's go. Let me grab this stuff and take it with us. Micah's chasing him. What are you doing? And they threaten him. And Jonathan doesn't seem to have any heartbreak about it. The moment a bigger audience comes, he's there. In the end, idolatry destroys. That's just a heavy lesson here. Idolatry, this idea of it's empty, it's meaningless, but ultimately it just poisons everything. Teresa, I'll let you have the last comment.
Isn't that a good description of division today and denominationalism?
I think this is all about denominationalism. Because what I think is interesting about the concept of denominationalism, not necessarily to poke at denominations, but the concept, is that you can have a worship of God and you can alter it so long as you're doing the right, you have the right heart or sincerity, all the things that we talked about that Micah and Jonathan had. But you can have all that and somehow it still makes it right. And that's what a lot of people think. It's what's in your heart that matters. It's, we use terms like that, but this is a great lesson to say it was more than that. It was about, understanding and doing what God wanted done. and they just utterly missed the mark. We're at our time. We don't have any classes at the back to ring a bell for, but we'll go ahead and put a pin on it here, and George is going to lead us in singing, so we'll move on to that. Thanks so much. A lot of great comments. I didn't get to my last question. How do these chapters point to a need for authorized leaders? But I do appreciate the fact that it was already mentioned by Ryan back there. Boy, it would have been something if Joshua had put somebody else next, but it just didn't happen that way. So. Ryan's left, yeah.
Please mark your songbooks to number 341. 341 will be the invitation song tonight. And then let's turn to number 630. 630. So watch and pray, for the Lord is coming, coming in the clouds someday. Wash your robes in the cleansing fountain. Watch, oh, watch and pray. Watch and pray. Oh, watch and pray. For we know not the hour when the Lord shall come. Watch and pray. Oh, watch and pray. And be ready to enter the soul's bright home. He may come in the early morning. He may come at close of day. Watch and pray in his promise trusting. Watch, oh, watch and pray. Watch and pray. Watch and pray. For we know not the hour when the Lord shall come. Watch and pray. Watch and pray. And be ready to enter the soul's bright home. When he comes, he'll reward the faithful. What a glorious day 'twill be. Joy awaits those who have made ready. Watch, oh, watch and pray. Watch and pray. Watch and pray. For we know not the hour when the Lord shall come. Watch and pray. Watch and pray. And be ready to enter the soul's bright